Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at someone whose life seems almost built on extremes, massive Hollywood success, really intense personal struggles, all lived out loud. We're talking about Angelina Jolie.
Yeah, and it's such a complex narrative, maybe one of the most multifaceted we've tackled, because she embodies this incredible duality. She goes from being Hollywood's celebrated wild child to this major action star, a serious actor, and then pivots again, becoming this high-level diplomatic figure, a special envoy. It's quite the arc.
That's exactly what we want to do today. Move past the tabloid stuff, the nicknames, all that noise.
Right.
We're aiming to really analyze the full story, trace that evolution.
Right.
From calling yourself a punk kid with tattoos.
Right.
All the way to winning a Tony Award as a producer, grabbing that Oscar, and literally shaping international policy with the UN.
And the evidence of her influence, it's just staggering when you list it out. The awards alone show how much she defied categorization. Of course, the early Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, 3 Golden Globes across different types of roles, and then remarkably just this year, adding a Tony for producing The Outsiders. But also, crucially, that Jean Herschel Humanitarian Award, that one really signals the shift, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It validates that her focus fundamentally moved beyond just entertainment.
Okay, so let's dive into that foundation. Where does it all begin? Born Angelina Jolie Voigt, June 4th, 1975, L.A. Parents are actors Jon Voight and Marceline Bertrand. That lineage itself sets a certain stage.
It really does. It gives you both the artistic potential and maybe some of the seeds of that early turbulence. Father's side, you've got German and Slovak roots. Her mother, Marceline Bertrand, had Dutch and French-Canadian ancestry. And there's this interesting little detail in the sources about the French side.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, she's a descendant of Wim Kok, who was Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
Oh, okay. That's an unexpected connection to, formal governance right there in her background. I also recall reading something about a claim of indigenous ancestry. Is that right?
Yeah, that comes through her mother's French-Canadian line. There was this distant claim, though it's noted as disputed, of Iroquois ancestry. But then her father, Jon Voight, publicly kind of shot that down later. Said it was something suggested to make her mother seem, quote, more exotic. Which just adds another sort of complicated layer to an already pretty fraught family dynamic.
And that core family unit, it fractures very early on. Parents separated in 76.
No.
And Marceline basically gives up her own acting career to raise Angelina and her brother James Haven.
Exactly. And her mother's sacrifice becomes this huge defining thing for Jolie. She often talks about Bertrand as her biggest inspiration. But yeah, that adolescence sounds deeply, deeply turbulent. A lot of identity searching.
Especially that time at Beverly Hills High. The sources really paint this picture of her feeling like a complete outsider, getting bullied.
It sounds like a real culture shock. Her mom was an actress, sure, but their income was apparently quite modest compared to the, extreme wealth around them at Beverly Hills High. So Jolie felt isolated, different, and yeah, reportedly teased relentlessly for being really thin, wearing glasses, braces, just feeling awkward.
Which leads to the move to Moreno High, the alternative school.
Yeah.
Seems less about academics and more about finding her tribe, maybe, reinventing herself.
That's exactly the impression. That's where she really leans into this punk outsider persona, committing to the all-black clothes, the moshing, getting into that intense energy, and pretty strikingly, starting to explore knife play.
Knife play, okay. That's intense, even for a rebellious phase. And it feels like it connects directly to those deeper struggles she was having internally.
It really seems to. It suggests this preoccupation with, control, boundaries, sensation maybe, and this sort of pull towards darkness led to one of the strangest career aspirations mentioned.
I saw this. Funeral director.
Yeah. For a time, she seriously considered becoming a funeral director, apparently even took at-home courses in embalming.
Wow. Okay, from punk outsider to studying embalming. That tells you so much about maybe needing control or confronting mortality during a time when everything else felt overwhelming emotionally.
Absolutely. Looking for some kind of anchor in the chaos. And that internal chaos, it definitely manifested in some really profound ways.
Yeah.
We do need to talk about the seriousness of the mental health struggles during this period. And yeah, it needs careful handling.
It's really key to understanding the person she became later. The sources talk about significant self-harm. She described it not as like a cry for help, but almost therapeutic.
Yeah, her explanation was that she struggled so much to feel connected or even just emotionally alive that the physical act of cutting, feeling that pain, actually provided a kind of release, made her feel real, palpable. And this was happening alongside crippling insomnia and an eating disorder.
And that spiraled by her late teens, early 20s into pretty heavy substance abuse.
It escalated significantly. By 20, she admitted she'd used just about every drug possible, specifically mentioned heroin as being a major problem. This pushed her into a really deep depression and profound suicidal thoughts. She actually planned suicide twice. And maybe most shocking, at 22, she tried to hire a hitman to kill her.
A hitman.
Yeah, thinking it would somehow be easier on her family than if she did it herself.
That level of self-destruction
Yeah.
is hard to fathom and hard to imagine coming back from, especially in the public eye.
She had a very public breakdown around age 24, ended up in the UCLA psychiatric ward for 72 hours. But what's really striking in the sources is how clear her turning point seems to be. It wasn't fame, it wasn't an award, it was becoming a mother.
Right, adopting Maddox in 2002. That
Yeah.
seems to be the line in the sand.
It really does. She said, basically, the moment she adopted Maddox, her life wasn't just hers anymore. She made this public commitment to never be self-destructive again, found this grounding sense of stability, of responsibility in being a parent. That adoption sounds like it genuinely saved her life.
But before that point, the family situation was still dominated by that incredibly complex, often painful relationship with her father, John Voight.
Yeah, that relationship was difficult from the very beginning, with Voight leaving the family before she was even a year old. She described their interactions later as being kind of sporadic, sometimes feeling almost performative for the cameras. They did try a reconciliation, though. Remember, they starred together in Lara Croft, Tomb Raider in 2001.
I do, but the sources say that didn't last long at all. It actually led to a really public, even legal split.
It deteriorated almost immediately after the film. Things got so bad that Jolie actually went to court to legally remove Voight as her surname. It's a huge statement, right? Showing how permanent she felt that separation needed to be, publicly and personally. The name change to just Angelina Jolie was finalized in late 2002.
And Voight didn't take that quietly. He went public with his side.
He really did. Went on Access Hollywood, famously claimed his daughter had serious mental problems, and basically pleaded with her publicly to get help. That seemed to be the absolute final straw. Her mother and brother sided completely with Angelina, cutting off contact with Voight, too.
And that silence, according to the sources, was total. Lasted for years. Living through that under a media microscope must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah, 6.5 years of absolutely no communication. A silence that was only broken, tragically, when her mother, Marceline Bertrand, passed away from ovarian cancer in early 2007. They did publicly reconcile a few years after Bertrand's death, but you have to imagine the scars from those years of estrangement, those public accusations, they run deep.
What's so wild is that all this personal turmoil is happening right alongside this incredibly fast-moving, evolving career. It wasn't just one trajectory. You can almost see 4 distinct phases.
Absolutely. That first phase, maybe 91 to 97, was really marked by struggle. Despite her parents being actors, she apparently had a tough time in auditions. Casting directors kept saying her persona was like too dark, too intense.
Yeah, and their first film role sounds like it was a real blow.
Her debut in Cyborg 2, that direct-to-video sci-fi thing in '93, it was apparently such a disappointment she just stopped auditioning for a whole year. She got some early visibility doing music videos, though, Lenny Kravitz, Meatloaf, and that really memorable Rolling Stones video, Anybody Seen My Baby?
Oh, right, where she played the stripper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the film that really broke her through, established that unique, edgy presence, was Hackers in 1995.
Yeah, Hackers definitely put her on the map in a different way.
That film just clicked with her look, her vibe, that sort of unconventional confidence. The New York Times even singled out that specific scene, her sitting at the keyboard in a see-through top. It wasn't just acting, it cemented her as this distinct, kind of dangerous, cool figure for young people.
Okay, so then phase 2, maybe 97 to 2000. This is where she shifts from just edgy to critically acclaimed, right? Starting with TV.
Yes, she found major success almost immediately in TV biopics. Won Golden Globes, got Emmy nods for playing Cornelia Wallace and George Wallace, and then the big one, playing the model Gia Karangi in Gia in '98.
And Gia became legendary for how deep she went with method acting. The sources suggest she basically walled herself off from her real life.
The intensity sounds almost scary, honestly. She completely submerged herself in Gia's character, the addiction, the decline. She apparently told her husband at the time, Johnny Lee Miller, don't call me. I'm alone, I'm denying I'm gay, I'm not going to see you for weeks. Just total immersion. It was so draining that after Gia, she apparently said she was quitting acting, felt she had nothing left.
But that intensity brought huge rewards. The Oscar win for Best Supporting Actress came right after in '99 for Girl, Interrupted.
Playing Lisa Rowe, that magnetic, manipulative, sociopathic patient, is perfect casting for that specific energy she had then. Roger Ebert nailed it when he called her one of the great wild spirits of current movies, a loose cannon who somehow has deadly aim. The Oscar basically said, okay, she's a lead.
Now, this is such an interesting pivot. She hits the absolute peak of critical acclaim with the Oscar for this intense method role, and then immediately shifts into phase 3, becoming this global blockbuster action hero. What drove that, 180 turn from 2001 onwards?
It feels very calculated and incredibly effective, maybe partly about translating that fame into real financial power, but also finding a different kind of challenge, something physical, not just psychological. And Lara Croft, Tomb Raider in 2001, was the vehicle for that shift.
And it worked instantly. Huge international hit. Required a total physical transformation, too.
Oh, yeah, she threw herself into it, months of martial arts, weapons training, even ballet, apparently, and mastering that specific upper-class English accent. Critics were kind of mixed on the film itself, but audiences loved it. $274 million worldwide. It didn't just make her an A-lister, it made her one of the very, very few bankable female action stars globally.
And her paychecks reflected that immediately, put her right at the top tier in Hollywood.
Absolutely. It started commanding, $10 to $15 million a film right after that from 2002 on. And she followed Tomb Raider with huge hits like Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2005. That one perfectly played into her public image at the time. Massive hit, nearly $500 million. And all the reviews just talked about that thermonuclear screen chemistry with her co-star.
And she used that power, that bankability, to take roles that maybe weren't originally written for women, showing some serious clout.
Exactly. Wanted in 2008 did well, but the real power play was probably Salt in 2010. That lead role, Evelyn Salt, was originally developed for Tom Cruise. She steps in, makes it her own, and proves her box office pull is right up there with any male action lead.
But even during this peak action star, high-earning phase, she didn't completely ditch the serious dramatic work, did she?
No, she kept that balance really well, actually. Her performance as Marianne Pearl in A Mighty Heart in 2007 got fantastic reviews for its subtlety and the accent work, even though there was some controversy around the casting itself. And then Changeling in 2008, directed by Clint Eastwood, that was another huge critical success, got her a Best Actress Oscar nomination.
Which brings us more or less to phase 4, starting around 2011. Her focus seems to really shift towards directing, producing, telling more international stories. Aligning much more with her humanitarian work.
Yeah, you can feel her interests changing. Her first time directing a feature, In the Land of Blood and Honey in 2011, felt like a real passion project. A love story set during the Bosnian War, directly fueled by her UNHCR experiences. And the fact that it earned her honorary citizenship of Sarajevo shows that connection, right? Film and diplomacy merging.
But even with that shift, she proved she could still open a massive blockbuster when she wanted to, going back to fantasy.
Oh, absolutely. You can't ignore Maleficent in 2014. That became her biggest box office hit ever, over $750 million worldwide. Just showed her unique star power and that kind of big fantasy spectacle. And the sequel in 2019 did almost $500 million too. Proves her draw, decades in.
She balanced that with more serious directing jobs, including that very personal one with Brad Pitt.
Right, she directed Unbroken in 2014, that big World War II story, which did well commercially and showed she could handle large-scale historical stuff. And then came By the Sea in 2015, that very intimate, kind of European-style art film drama she starred in with Pitt, drew on her mother's life, her struggles. Critics were quite harsh on that one, though. Many called it a vanity project.
And her focus just kept leaning more international, more towards producing.
First They Killed My Father in 2017 is a prime example. Set during the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, a place so central to her life story. Produced for Netflix, entirely Khmer cast. Really showed her commitment to stories outside the usual Hollywood focus.
And we have to touch on the recent stuff, too, blending acting and producing again.
Definitely. Winning the Tony in 2024 for producing The Outsiders musical. That's a whole new arena of theater, and she succeeded there. And then her latest acting role, playing Maria Callas in Maria, already getting massive buzz. Golden Globe nomination, critics calling it a career best, shows her power as a dramatic actress is still absolutely there.
Let's pivot back to that moment in 2001, Cambodia, filming Tomb Raider. Because that seems to be the absolute turning point, shifting her from just film star to this dedicated global citizen. It wasn't just a quick photo op, was it?
No, not at all. It was a fundamental rerouting. She describes seeing the humanitarian crisis there firsthand in a country still recovering from war. It just gave her this immediate, really visceral understanding of global suffering. And she didn't just, tweet about it. She came home and immediately contacted the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR, directly, bypassed the usual channels.
And the commitment level, right from the start, was apparently way beyond what you usually see from celebrities.
Absolutely. It wasn't just lending her name. Within months, she was doing intense field missions, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Pakistan, meeting Afghan refugees, and she immediately donated $1 million to a UNHCR emergency appeal for Pakistan, which at that time was the single biggest private donation UNHCR had ever received.
And the sources make a point of saying she insisted on sharing the same basic conditions as the field staff.
That's so key. She paid for everything herself, flights, security, everything, covered all mission costs, and insisted on living and working in the exact same, often very rudimentary conditions as the UNHCR field staff. She wasn't just visiting, she was genuinely embedding herself in the work.
That kind of dedication obviously got noticed, led to the formal appointment pretty quickly.
Yeah, named a UNHCR Goodwill ambassador in August 2001, and then for the next decade, the pace was just relentless. Over 40 field missions, more than 30 countries, and she deliberately focused on what she called forgotten emergencies, crises the media had moved on from, going into active war zones like Darfur, the Syrian-Iraqi border, Kabul, regularly.
There's that interesting detail in the sources, too, about her becoming a pilot, aiding her work.
Yes. To help her get to these remote, often dangerous places quickly, and even to personally ferry aid supplies sometimes, she got her pilot's license in 2004. By 2014, sources say she owned a Cirrus SR-22 and a Cessna 208 Caravan. It just shows this practical, operational commitment, not just the symbolic stuff.
And her role evolved significantly in 2012, confirming that move into serious diplomacy.
Big step up. Promoted to Special Envoy to the High Commissioner. That gave her actual diplomatic authority. She could represent the High Commissioner himself in major crises, like meeting Colombian refugees, dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis at a high level.
She did step down from that specific role in 2022, but pledged to keep advocating. And her work branched out, too, into conservation, community development, mainly through the Maddox Jolie Pitt Foundation, right?
Yep.
MJP.
MJT is huge. Based in Cambodia, obviously, Maddox's birthplace. Started in 2003, initially maybe just to connect him to his heritage, but it quickly became this massive conservation project. She bought this initial plot of land, 39 hectares, next to Sam Laut National Park, which was apparently overrun with illegal poachers.
So how did she tackle that? Turning a poaching hotspot into a reserve.
Well, she didn't just buy the land and put up a fence. The foundation eventually expanded its protection to cover 60,000 hectares of the park. And the really smart part was the community strategy. MJP hired former poachers, former illegal loggers, gave them stable jobs as rangers, conservationists. It completely changed the economic incentive, turned adversaries into guardians.
And MJP grew beyond just wildlife, didn't it, into community infrastructure.
Yeah, in 2006, it became one of Asia's first millennium villages, based on that Jeffrey Sachs model. Building schools, roads, creating sustainable local businesses like a soy milk factory. Supporting around 6,000 villagers, aiming for long-term economic health. Plus, she set up the Shiloh Jolie Pitt Foundation in Namibia, focused on large animal conservation and funding clinics, and a school for the local San Bushman community. Really broad scope.
Back in the U.S., she was also pushing hard on the legislative side, especially around child immigrants.
Consistently. Lobbying in D.C. for things like the Unaccompanied Alien Child Protection Act back in 2005. Since 2008, she's co-chaired Kind Kids in Need of Defense. That group basically coordinates free, pro bono legal help for unaccompanied minors in immigration proceedings, which is a huge, huge need.
And education, particularly in conflict zones, remained a big focus.
Right. Co-chairing the Education Partnership for Children of Conflict, pushing for policy and funding, directly funding schools in places like Kenya, Afghanistan, Cambodia, and also recognizing the information crisis. She's an executive producer on that BBC program, My World, teaching teens media literacy, how to spot fake news.
But maybe the most significant, lasting institutional impact came from her work fighting sexual violence and conflict. That seems to be where she truly shifted from advocate to actual policy shaper.
The Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative, PSVI, that's probably the peak of her diplomatic achievement, launched in 2012 with William Hague, who was the UK Foreign Secretary then. And the direct inspiration, interestingly, was her film In the Land of Blood and Honey. It made the issue unavoidable for her.
What were the concrete results of PSDI? It sounds like she achieved things that career diplomats often struggle with.
She used her unique platform, her access, her diplomatic standing to speak directly to the most powerful groups. She addressed the G8 foreign ministers, the UN Security Council, and it led to actual binding declarations. The G8 adopted this landmark statement committing to tackle the issue. The UN passed its broadest resolution ever on preventing sexual violence as a weapon of war. She played a key role in fundamentally shifting how the world treats this, not just as a tragic side effect of war, but as a recognized, prosecutable war crime.
That is just a remarkable use of celebrity power for concrete policy change. And it even led to an academic position for her.
Yeah, recognizing her expertise, the London School of Economics, LSE, appointed her a visiting professor in 2016, helped establish their Center on Women, Peace and Security, and she hasn't stopped. Domestically, she keeps lobbying for the Violence Against Women Act, Caden's Law, the Justice for All Reauthorization Act.
And she's weighed in on current global events, too, using her platform.
Definitely. Visited Ukrainian children in 2022 to highlight the war's impact. And in 2023, she made major headlines criticizing Israel's actions in Gaza, very publicly calling for a humanitarian ceasefire.
All of which, understandably, brought recognition from the very highest levels.
Well, she got the Freedom Award from the International Rescue Committee back in 2007. But the big one, obviously, was in 2014 when Queen Elizabeth II made her an honorary Dame Commander, the DCMG, for her services to UK foreign policy and her campaigning. Personally received it from the Queen. That image, that moment, going from the wild child with blood vials to Dame Commander Jolie, it perfectly encapsulates that incredible transformation.
Of course, that journey to Dame Commander was paved with some incredibly public, often controversial personal choices that really defined her early image. Her relationships were, well, pure tabloid gold.
They were almost performance art in themselves, weren't they? Even before she was globally famous, she talked about her first serious relationship, age 14 to 16, as being like a marriage in its intensity. Her mom actually let the boyfriend live with them, thinking it might provide some safety, some stability for her.
Then came the first actual marriage to Johnny Lee Miller, famous for the unusual wedding outfit.
Oh yeah, the 1996 wedding, pure Jolie theater, black rubber pants, white t-shirt, with his name written on it in her own blood. That marriage lasted about 4 years, ending just as she was moving into her next big public relationship.
And during that period, she was also really open about relationships with women, confirming her bisexuality.
Very open. Talked about her relationship with model Jenny Shimizu, famously saying, "I would probably have married Jenny if I hadn't married my husband. I fell in love with her the first second I saw her," and later explicitly confirmed it, saying, yeah, if she fell in love with a woman, absolutely, yes.
Then came the Billy Bob Thornton marriage, 2000 to 2003. That became like the global symbol of extreme, over-the-top public passion.
That was the era, wasn't it? Matching tattoos, constant public declarations of love, and of course the vials of each other's blood worn around their necks. They announced Maddox's adoption together, but then suddenly split just 3 months later. Thornton blamed different lifestyles, but Jolie admitted it caught her off guard, said something like, "Overnight, we totally changed. One day, we had just nothing in common."
Which leads, inevitably, to the whole Brangelina era, starting with Mr. and Mrs. Smith and the very public end of Brad Pitt's marriage to Jennifer Aniston.
The media storm around that was just unprecedented. Jolie always strongly denied an affair during filming, though. She often brought up her own trauma from her father cheating on her mother, saying she couldn't have lived with herself if she'd done that. But their relationship, lasting 12 years, became this global obsession. Constant, intense scrutiny.
What's interesting is how quickly they seem to harness that intense fame, that scrutiny, for philanthropic purposes.
Yeah, it was a very conscious strategy, it seems. Moving from maybe self-focused performance art to strategic philanthropy. They broke records selling the first photos of their children, with all the money going to charity. Shiloh's first pictures reportedly went for $7.6 million to UNICEF. Then the twins, Knox and Vivienne, their first photos sold for a reported $14 million.
$14 million. Wow.
Yeah, the most expensive celebrity photos ever at the time. And all of it went straight to their Jolie Pitt Foundation.
And the family itself grew rapidly during that time, becoming this very visible blend of biological and adopted children from around the world.
6 kids in total. Maddox from Cambodia in 2002, the adoption was later cleared, despite some controversy around the facilitator involved. Zahara from Ethiopia in 2005, initially thought to be an AIDS orphan, though her birth mother later came forward and okayed the adoption. Pitt formally adopted both Maddox and Zahara in 2006. then Shiloh, their first biological child, born in Namibia later that year.
And the adoption of Pax from Vietnam had some specific hurdles, right?
It did, because Vietnamese law at the time didn't allow unmarried couples to co-adopt. So Jolie adopted Pax in 2007, technically as a single parent. Pitt then adopted him formally in the U.S. in 2008. And finally, the biological twins, Knox and Vivienne, were born in France in 2008.
The marriage itself ended very publicly in 2016, triggering this incredibly long, messy, and highly publicized legal fight.
Oh, the separation kicked off years of legal battles over custody and finances, dragging on well into 2021. It got very ugly, included Jolie filing counterclaims alleging physical and verbal abuse by Pitt on that 2016 plane flight. The FBI investigated but ultimately closed the case without charges. But just the sheer length and public nature of the disputes, almost 5 years, it really showed how hard it is to untangle a partnership that had become that mythic.
Despite all that intense, often negative focus on her private life, arguably her biggest cultural impact came from her health advocacy, what the media dubbed the Angelina effect.
This is such a clear example of using fame for widespread good. In 2013, Jolie, only 37, announces she's had a preventative double mastectomy. Not because she had cancer, but because she carried that faulty BRCA1 gene, giving her an estimated 87% lifetime risk of breast cancer. Her mother, grandmother, aunt had all died from related cancers. It was a very proactive, preventative choice driven by that family history.
And she followed it up just 2 years later with another major preventive surgery.
Right. In 2015, she had a preventative salpingo oophorectomy removal of her ovaries and fallopian tubes because the BRCA1 gene also gave her a 50% risk of ovarian cancer. That procedure immediately put her into premature menopause.
And she chose to share these incredibly personal, difficult decisions very publicly, through op-eds in the New York Times, making herself vulnerable to raise awareness.
She was incredibly candid, explained her reasoning very clearly, doing it for her children so she could be there for them, and she framed it as empowering, challenging ideas about femininity, saying she felt she'd made a strong choice that in no way diminishes my femininity.
And the impact was immediate and measurable, globally.
Yeah, the Angelina effect became this documented public health phenomenon, a huge sustained spike in referrals for BRCA gene testing worldwide. Rates tripled in Australia, doubled in the UK, Canada, India. Research showed her message really reached the target audience, prompting women at risk to seek testing. And crucially, her advocacy happened right around the time the U.S. Supreme Court struck down patents on the BRCA genes in 2013, which made testing much cheaper and more accessible. The timing was perfect.
Okay, finally, let's just quickly touch on her public image evolution, her status as a style icon.
It's an incredible transformation to track. Those early years were all about the wild child image, right? Gothic influences, leather, tattoos, the fascination with knives, blood. That's what grabbed the initial headlines. But by 2006, as the humanitarian work became more prominent, her Q score, that industry measure of likability and familiarity, had nearly doubled.
She somehow managed to become a sex symbol, a mother of 6, and a respected global humanitarian figure all at the same time, which is rare.
She really did reconcile those seemingly contradictory images in the public mind, constantly named world's most beautiful woman by magazines, Forbes' most powerful celebrity in 2009. Her look became iconic, the full lips, the numerous tattoos, like the Sanskrit prayers, that Latin quote, quod me nutrit me, nourishes me, destroys me. They're instantly recognizable cultural markers.
And her fashion sense evolved right along with her public role.
Big time. That shift from the dark, gothic leather look to this very minimalist, often old Hollywood-inspired glamour was really noticeable and clearly intentional. Maybe the peak iconic style moment was that black velvet Versace gown at the 2012 Oscars.
Oh, the leg dress.
The leg dress, exactly. That dramatic pose became an instant, enduring global meme. Just cemented her status as this massive cultural influencer, even just standing still on a red carpet.
So, when you pull it all together, what our sources really show is this narrative completely defined by duality and by deliberate transformation. You have the deeply troubled young woman overcoming some really serious self-destructive patterns, seemingly through sheer force of will, to become this figure of global responsibility.
Yeah, and you have the cinematic powerhouse who broke ground for women in action films, but then consciously chose to step back from that intense spotlight to become this dedicated special envoy, tackling global crises with real diplomatic weight.
Her life story really is like a case study in how to turn intense personal experience and intense public fame into actual institutional influence. She managed to bridge Hollywood, high-level diplomacy, global health,
Yeah.
using her fame to push for things like the Violence Against Women Act, establishing international protocols with PSVI.
Right. When you think about her total impact, you have to look beyond just the box office grosses, right? You look at those tangible societal shifts. The Angelina effect is the clearest example. One person's very personal health choice, communicated openly, directly impacts public health knowledge and access to medical care on a global scale. Gets thousands of women potentially life-saving testing.
That scale of influence, it really does raise a big, maybe provocative question for anyone listening and thinking about this. If one person's choices can demonstrably change medical access, even contribute to international law,
It forces you to ask, doesn't it, what responsibility comes with that kind of unparalleled global platform? And maybe more practically, how can other influential people leverage their own platforms? Not just for general awareness, or fundraising, but for the kind of specific, measurable institutional change in society, in law, that Angelina Jolie actually managed to achieve in her sort of second act. It's a real challenge to anyone with that kind of spotlight.
that is definitely something deep to reflect on. The potential and maybe the responsibility of purposeful celebrity. Thank you for walking us through such a complex and fascinating life.
My pleasure. It was a lot to unpack.
That was the deep dive. We'll see you next time.